Thank you very much. It's good to be here in Delhi after some time from Australia. Now, we've just heard a great opening address by John Bailey, and I think some of the things which we'll be talking about he's already touched upon on things like sort of crisis management and brand reputation. Our guests here are sort of accomplished speakers and thought leaders in the industry. So I will just open the panel very quickly, probably start with Ashwani Singla on terms of, artificial intelligence and how it sort of ties up with crisis management and the communication industry. Where do you see this going, bringing in artificial intelligence, considering you are an expert in the data reputation advisory firm?
Thanks, Raj. First of all, Anurag, thank you very much for your very generous invitation and words of and very generous words in your remarks. The panel is very esteemed, Raj. Thanks very much. John, absolutely delightful presentation. I think you hit the spots dead on. And the hotel business is a great example of articulating what's really going on. So there are two or three things, and let me just submit what John said, and then I'll sort of argue my point. One, what John talked about was in the world of technology, everything is real time, which means our ability to respond to good news, bad news, crazy news is almost in real time basis. Second, pictures speak louder than words, and videos and pictures is the new currency of communication. You combine that with real-time visual images, bring the emotion, the story live into our handphones, bedrooms, wherever we are in real time. I think that's the second big thing that he brought about. And the third thing that he talked about is the story. What's the tone? What's the nature? What's the content that has to be that we have to communicate? Now, if you look at these three elements of storytelling, visual imagery, and in terms of speed of response, how does technology then enable that? What are the risks and opportunities for brands to be managed? And then how do you deal with it when things go wrong? I mean, that's the sum total of it. Now, one of the most important things that I've always spoken about is to make communication relevant, compelling, useful. You need to understand the audiences to whom you want to communicate. What drives them, what motivates them, and what are their fears and apprehensions so that you can frame your dialogue in the right manner. The classic case of United is great. The reaccommodation versus complete lack of demonstration of the key concerns and expectations of the people. Now, what technology does is allows, okay, let me just back up. How many people here have ever used Google search? 100%. How many people here have ever gone online to shop? All. How many people use Netflix, Ola? All right. So we are living in a world where we transact in real time, which means that every device, every technology that we interact with is in some way tracking the behavior and capturing that pattern. Far better than ever before, because now the power of computing and ML, what is machine learning, is now getting us from what I call an insight-based communication to a foresight-based communication. If we are smart communicators, I think our ability to look ahead instead of look back is something that allows us to be better prepared to be in the real-time world. So I think the biggest advantage that you can use the emerging technologies or what I call machine learning or AI, there's a difference between the two, but nevertheless, is to be better prepared, smarter about understanding what's going on, and we can look ahead. That, I think, is an absolutely fantastic asset to have for any communication that has to happen in almost a real-time world. So I think that's the one big advantage that we can have. Guess what? There are over 70,000 searches per second in the world on Google. There are 70,000 plus Instagram posts. There are over 9,000 tweets per second, every single second in the world. You think about the amount of data, emotion, message that we are capturing that can be used if we are smart. Data monitor is just one example of it. So I think that's the most important part. Second, if you look at what, and I was listening to the chief brand officer of P&G just last month at an event in conference, and P&G has the largest budget. His single point message to us as communicators was storytelling is the key to effective brand engagement. He is not the biggest fan of advertising any longer, and he put forward certain examples of how great content and great storytelling in the internet world or in the digital world actually created better engagement and better outcomes for his business. So the second bit is using that foresight, using that insight that we are capturing through the use of technology, we can make far better content. And that's where the role of public relations or communicators start. The third bit, and I think that's really the point where I couldn't agree more with John, I think there is no better preparedness for a crisis than to do what is right. And the last point that you talked about value-based communication, I operate in the field of reputation, and one of the significant risks and areas of opportunity for reputation management is what a character, a person, or a company displays. If we can think about what drives us, and we use something called leadership with a purpose. If we live for a purpose and we drive everything that happens through that purpose, I think you're creating what is called gates of assets, and you're creating positive momentum, which allows you to deal with crises when things do really go wrong. As you know, if you're really bad, then you can't really make it good. So that would be my few thoughts about brand management, role of technology, and what to do when we think things go wrong.
Thank you. Thank you, Ashwani. I think there were some real good tips there, and I find that the real issue right now, and I think you both have touched on it before, John before, and now you, I find that there are issues about risk management, which is to do with fake news. Now, fake news has become a real problem across the board in the industry. It is the real devil of social media, the flip side of social media. So I want to sort of bring in Nikhil Day from Genesis on that. How do we tackle that in this day and age of live or instant sharing?
Thank you, Raj. Before I begin, I would like to, it struck me when Anurag was doing the introduction, I truly am in august company on this panel, and some of my fellow panelists probably don't know the impact. Well, one does, but the other two probably don't know the impact they've had on my career. So 30 seconds on that. Dilip taught me in IMI and introduced me to this profession, right? So I'm partly here thanks to him. Ashwani hired me into my first PR job and has been my boss and mentor. So I'm here because of him. And John probably doesn't know I've attended one of his crisis workshops when he was running it for a client, and today I run a few myself. So thank you, all three of you.
We all need mentors, don't we? Yes.
But on the topic of fake news, I tripped into this subject by accident and have been exploring it, and hence I would like to share a few thoughts. I tripped into it when my dad shared a Facebook post of a dog with a piece of ham slapped across its eyes, which made it look like it had been burnt, and it was to raise money for this poor dog. And it struck me that, you know, I pontificate about fake news, I talk about it, and I give all these tips on it, but it's very close to home. It's happening in my house. My dad is part of the problem. So I started looking at it more from a consumer prism and then also a communications prism to try and own it rather than say, you know, it's one of those words where when I say fake news, we all have a view of what it is. It's like strategy. We all think we know what strategy is, or digital. These are words that all of us have our own definitions for. But if you even Google or look for any definition on fake news, you will find that there is no clear definition of it. And therein begins the first problem. How do you fix something that you can't define? So at one end of the spectrum of fake news is misinformation by mistake. A la my dad sharing this post of this allegedly poor dog in need of help with great intent and good intent. So he's doing nothing wrong, or maybe he is. And at the other end, you have real evil at work. There is disinformation by design to deceive. And we live in that world, and we are consumers there, and many of us are also communicators over there. So I try to apply my thinking to this intersection of technology and our human frail tendencies of consuming bad news and enjoying it and sharing it. And I put down one or two thoughts on what could be things we could do to be part of the solution. So what could I do first? The first thing I could do was to open my mind to different points of views. There's something called confirmation bias, right? In communications, we study about it. But let me bring that very alive. Till very recently, I was a smoker. And every time I read any information about how bad smoking was for me, I ignored it. I refused to look at it. And similarly, there is content on vegetarianism, veganism, non-vegetarianism, and we all are victim of that, or we are part of that problem. We tend to share the stuff that confirms our view of the world. So the first thing I would urge us to do is open our minds to different points of view. Because if we are tolerant of different points of view, we are less likely to be hitting that share button on anything we don't like. And the velocity of bad news could be reduced if it's fake, if we are mindful of that. The second thing I think we could do is to, what I say, be the drop in the ocean. Every time you are passing on some content, take that 30 seconds to validate or try and figure out whether it is true. And I have found the change. I am not unwittingly adding to that velocity of bad news. The third thing is to make it dinner table conversation. And I learned a lot more from my 17-year-old son on fake news than I thought I could, because he's far more up to date on this subject than me. But talk about it at home, but talk about it to your parents as well, right? I think they are as active on all these platforms as you. And the last one I would say is seek out people smarter than you on this subject. There is a lot of content written on it. There are podcasts, blog posts, read about it, own it. It is a real problem. It's in our living rooms and our lives. So that's what you can do as an individual. But as communicators, 2 or 3 thoughts. One John already talked about. Enable your organizations, the brands you work for, to respond fast. So commission that firm to, whether it's the one that John talked about or any others, to have that always on listening. You need to know what's happening there. But another interesting thought that I tripped upon, which I think we should champion, is we are all becoming content creators, right? All the brands we work for are content creators. So we need to introduce codes of conduct on content creation. So content creation codes of conduct need to be written, championed, and brought alive so that we know what's okay. Can I share this? Can't I share this? So that fake news problem gets reduced. And probably the third thing I would say on this is, we saw that statement, right? It wasn't human, it wasn't appropriate. Let's assume that we managed to get ahead of the curve, we saw the pictures, we needed to respond visually, because words are not going to fight that picture, but there could be a place and time where the velocity of that picture is in no way going to match up to the velocity of that gory one. The other thing that spreads pretty fast online is funny stuff, right? Now, I don't say that that particular video you can respond to with a funny comment, but there is much fake news which is patently wrong about brands that can be tackled, I believe, with a healthy dose of humor. And that's going to get far more velocity than a very plain Jane vanilla CEO speaking saying, I'm sorry. So say the sorry, but then put that out. So I'll end with that. Thank you.
Well, I think we're hands together for Nikhil there. I think there were some really key messages there, and I think one of the key messages there, Nikhil, is responsibility. We as individuals are responsible because we've got that little gadget on our phones to be responsible what we share. And I think I'll just say this little example. There was a Lind Cafe siege in Sydney. I think the world knows about it. And this happened a few years ago. I would compare it with 2611. And I think one of the things which everyone was on Twitter sort of trying to sort of share stuff. And Martin Place is in the CBD. Now this was being amplified. The authorities were doing their own job. Things were under control, but then when people start jumping on the bandwagon, it just spreads. And then they realize, oh my God, I'm actually doing a disservice by just sharing this. Just to sort of have a feel-good 2 seconds, you're actually not, you're aggravating the situation. So responsible sharing, I think, is a key over there. Thank you. Now, I will have to ask this to a veteran, Dilip Cherian, over here, that artificial intelligence. You know, Dilip, you've been in the industry for, many decades. How is artificial intelligence going to change or is changing the communication industry?
Thank you. I think for a start, some intelligence would help. Just plain old vanilla intelligence would help. Okay? So you can't do without that. Artificial is what enhances real intelligence. So a lot of us tend to mistake tools for what the progress actually is. So what artificial intelligence does, of any kind, and I'm going out on a limb to say this, till we reach the third generation of artificial intelligence, which is when cognitive technologies start speaking to each other and ignore all of us. That, fortunately, is not likely for the next 3 years. So most experts say 20 years, but knowing the speed of progress, I'm not willing to stick my neck out, but at least for the next 3 years, you will not have smart machines talking to smart machines and ignoring all human interfaces. That's the phase we are not going to talk about. But when you talk of artificial intelligence today, the smart thing is to treat it as an enhancement of what your competence, capability, and culpability could be. So you have somebody who is second guessing and then forecasting for you, a word that Ashwani used just now, to give a foretaste of what is coming your way, to get an alert, as he said, using artificial intelligence to get that 15 seconds advantage before that tsunami hits you in the face. We are using artificial intelligence, but really in a much more conventional way, where we have gone down fairly far down the road to be able to pick out pieces of information which our clients need, get them filtered in a manner, automated, because I think the main thing that all of us in this room have to come to terms with is that if you don't automate what is a routine part of your business, we're going to be replaced by a pedestrian form of artificial intelligence. So you've got to be able to empower your intelligence with whatever helps you automate, which is actually the first and most basic form of using artificial intelligence. And I think if we can take that message home for now, we'd have done quite well. The ability to spot and to respond quicker is not just a matter of speed. It is, as what Nikhil was saying, it's also a bit of storytelling. It's a bit of being able to amplify what is your viewpoint. Like humor, the thing that we often forget as communications professionals is bad news travels viciously fast, jokes travel hilariously quick. But when we are working with clients, corporates, NGOs, governments, whatever they may be, political parties, the thing that we fail to amplify and which is considered as rubbish PR is when any customer or any recipient feels good about something that your client has done. when she's happy, are you storing that? Are you going to be able to play that back? Are you putting it into a context where her happiness or her satisfaction with the service you've got is something that you have a large enough repository of, which very often is the best and the biggest bulwark against attacks on you. So it may not be the right time to respond with it during a crisis, but during the time of building your reputation back up, it's possible that you're found wanting because you haven't bothered to make sure that you capture those aha moments which have made client experience on an airline, in a hotel, at a store, much happier or pleasantly surprising to real human beings. So this, I think, is, in a world awash in fake news, I think this is something, a lot of factoids, a lot of small things which engage immediately with the immediacy that helps to address the problem. So I think that what I'd like to see is a gradual building up in a professional way of content banks which allow you to tackle this huge problem which we have to tackle. Okay? There's no one answer. Nikhil's given a few tips on how to handle fake news, but going beyond that, what after you've reacted to that? How do you make sure that you put in new parameters of competitive advantage to give you slightly greater longevity than your competitor would? Fake news and artificial intelligence are actually closely linked. Being able to predict the kinds of fake news that come out is actually possible if you graft on what's happened in, say, a company that's in the business of fashion, okay, will have a crisis. But you should be able to find methods of seeing how to graft that on into some other industry. So what may be a wardrobe malfunction in a fashion industry runway show could be a problem which you should be able to help your client predict. And artificial intelligence will give you the ability to scan through multiple industries, and you will never actually find that black swan moment that your client is terrified about. But you can train him or her about a whole bunch of possible moments, because there's no preparation as good as being able to spot, using all kinds of creepy crawly methods that exist, to accrete that knowledge and to keep them prepared for the day when some crisis of that kind, maybe not the magnitude that you predict, maybe not of the angularity that you think is going to impact you tremendously, but something that prepares your client. That's the other thing that we need to take away from here. So having a repository of good news and being able to use artificial intelligence to graft onto your client's practices things which could go wrong and which will. The last point I'd like to leave for you to think about is that this black swan moments are very often impacting share prices, market shares, willingness of employees, potential employees to join you. But remember, these things can drown you if you don't deal with them. And that's where real intelligence comes in. Real intelligence is being able to distinguish, when you're telling a client or advising a client, between things they need to react to and things they best shut up about. So sometimes we are paid vast sums of money to tell a client that just don't do anything for the next 2 days. Now, in the world of rapidly escalating crisis, you might think this is wrong advice. But I've seen many a crisis come and go if you just hold your horses and wait for those 2 hours before that peak tends to just calm itself down. Of course, if your competition or your enemies, in inverted commas, and many of us in the business are unwilling to call anyone else our enemy, but if your enemies are helping to escalate that, then you should know how to respond to that too. And there again, artificial intelligence helps to pinpoint where the spikes are coming from. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Dilip. I think again it's to do with being honest, and John mentioned earlier that real intelligence versus artificial intelligence. I don't know whether it'll be completely replacing humans, but I think that empathy, which you mentioned, John, earlier, there would be tools coming in, and I think I want to sort of ask you about that, that you see the spike, and that's picked up by something like a data miner you talked about. But do you think it's tools like that would be ever replacing humans, or is it just going to be adding value?
No, I think all that a tool like that is going to be able to do is alert you to what people are talking about. How you then respond to that, to quote Dilip Beckett himself, is down to your own intelligence, your own professional judgment as a communication professional. I'd just like to go back to something that Nikhil raised, which was the issue of confirmation bias. That phenomenon is being accelerated by the algorithms used by search engines and social media channels. Why? Because the algorithms are set up to show you more of what it knows you like. So if, for example, you like looking at cat videos, every time you open Facebook, it's going to show you more cat videos. Same on your Twitter feed. Now, as it happens, the CEO of Google is currently testifying to Congress in Washington about the impact of supposed political bias on the way that Google prioritizes search results. The Republicans in Congress are convinced that there's some little man behind the curtain who's manipulating search results to the detriment of conservative opinion or conservative policies. In fact, there was a priceless moment yesterday when a congresswoman asked Sundar Pichai, why is it that when you type the word idiot into the Google search box under images, the first thing that comes up is Donald Trump? And to all the Republicans on the committee, this is only further proof of political bias on the part of Google. And Sundar Pichai had to say, well, the way, he said, I promise you, it's nothing to do with that. No human can actually interfere with this. What the algorithms do is it looks at what other people are already talking about in connection with that search term. So, you know, he didn't go on to say this, it was implicit. If people think, a lot of people out there think Donald Trump's an idiot, and they're talking about it on social media, that is in fact the first thing that's going to come up. But the effect it's having is twofold. One is it's driving people, and especially you're seeing this in the United States, you're seeing it in the UK of the whole Brexit saga. It's driving people into their own echo chambers when they're only exposed to sources of information that tell them what they already want to hear. And it doesn't do what Nikhil was saying, expose you to other forms of opinion. Now, what does that mean for communicators? Well, you know, fake news has always been with us. It's always been with us. Incorrect reporting has always been with us. But, you know, in recent times, that term has been weaponized very deliberately to delegitimize mainstream news media and to therefore delegitimize dissenting opinion or reporting of wrongdoing, to delegitimize, for example, the whole Mueller inquiry that's going on right now in the US. So, you know, as communicators, the challenge I think it creates for us is, if the audience doesn't fully trust the medium, how do we get our message heard? At a time when we're being bombarded with lots of other messages too. And I think it comes back to something I said in the presentation. Ultimately, all you can do is control what you can control as a company or as a brand. And that starts with being true to yourself. You know, be who you are and be proud of it and live those values, demonstrate those values. And if you ever fall short of those values, apologize and explain what you're doing to fix it so that you can be better next time, which is what, you know, Oscar Munoz ultimately had to go and do, exactly. but a week after the event. And you know, I'm quite certain he didn't enjoy a minute of that apology tour, but it was absolutely necessary to start rebuilding trust in United Airlines.
Well, thank you for that. I think the message there is that you take ownership, and I think you mentioned that earlier as well, Ashwani, that there is this thing about you can come up with a story, and in your example as well, the United. It came out from the horse's mouth. So that dragging, there was no fakeness there. It was the real deal. but then how it gets amplified and what people sort of jump on that and create their own spin-offs on that, and then that becomes a disruption of its own kind. I think that's the time we have. Can you please put your hands together for our panelists, John Bailey, Dilip Cherian, Nikhil Day, and Ashwani Singla. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Suri. I would request the panel to stay here, and I want to invite on stage Ms. Archana Jain, founder, PR Pundit, to come and felicitate our esteemed panelists. Can we have a huge round of applause, please? Wait. Thank you. Ma'am, yes to everyone, yes. She's coming, yes. And there's a photo op with each individual speaker, yes.